So we've talked quite a bit about Davos and the World Economic Forum and how it's basically a group of billionaire capitalist ghouls who think they're way smarter than they are, and they get together to jerk each other off about how brilliant they are and about how they're going to save the world, and they float all these insane ideas that make no sense and are never going to happen, when, of course, a way to actually fix problems would be to raise taxes on their asses and then redistribute the wealth to regular people through, various social safety net programs, etc. Well, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin decided, I'm going to go hang out with at Davos and with the World Economic Forum demons. And you're not going to be surprised to see this moment that they had here. So Sawyer Hackett tweets, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, surrounded by billionaire CEOs in Davos, share a high five after agreeing that they won't reform the Senate filibuster. She still hasn't held a town hall for her constituents. So she's dodging her own constituents, but she goes to hang out with these billionaire pricks. These capitalist spawn of Satan types. So here, let me show you the high five.
Difference for the American people in the last 2 years.
Oh, okay. Somebody pointed this out on Twitter, so I'm stealing it, but she looks like Cruella de Vil. She absolutely does.
Agree on getting rid of the filibuster.
That's correct.
Thank you. I was
Difference for the American people in the last 2 years.
And we still don't agree on getting rid of the filibuster.
That's correct.
Thank you. I was
Difference.
So, look, what does that tell you about not only Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, but like Davos and the World Economic Forum? This is the most important part, guys. They might virtue signal like, bro, we're heroes and we're going to bring change. But ultimately, this is a status quo protection racket. Everything works for them just fine, and fundamentally, they're trying to protect their power and privilege by any means necessary. Which, by the way, is why the right-wing critics of Davos and the World Economic Forum, none of those people make sense. They all, exaggerate and pretend like these people do things that they're not going to do, because all those right-wing critics also support the status quo. All those right-wing critics like Glenn Beck, for example, he supported the Trump tax cut in 2017 where 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. So as he postures like he's against these guys, they actually fundamentally agree. They believe in the status quo. They believe in capitalism. They believe in the extreme income and wealth inequality. And so it's kind of annoying because, again, all the posturing from the right being against these people, but like, if you're actually against these people, the answer is raise taxes on them and redistribute it to working people. Like, that's the actual answer. So, no surprise that Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin fit in here. What they're bragging about right here is we don't like democracy. That's what they're bragging about. Now, I don't think that's unfair. Like, I don't think that's a straw man. I think that's a very straightforward interpretation of them high-fiving over keeping the filibuster, because what is the filibuster? The filibuster is a rule that says you need 60 votes or more in a 100-vote body to get anything through. And so if you believe in democracy, you believe in 51 votes, right? Like, if you have more votes, you win. And they're openly in favor of, no, it should be 60 or more. So they're in favor of the minority position winning the debate. And so just to give you guys some backstory, we've talked about this before, but I want to brush everybody up because it's super important. Look at the history of the filibuster, okay? Under original Senate rules, cutting off debate required a motion that passed with a simple majority. But in 1806, after Vice President Aaron Burr argued the rule was redundant, the Senate stopped using the motion. This change inadvertently gave senators the right to unlimited debate, meaning that they could indefinitely delay a bill without supermajority support from ever getting to a vote. This tactic is what we know now as the filibuster. So, in other words, the filibuster is not in the Constitution. Basically, it was 1806 the first time that people conceived of what the filibuster was, and the filibuster was almost like a gimmick, but the important part is you had to basically start talking and not stop talking. You had to block a vote on the bill by just doing debate permanently, right? And so in theory, it's like, well, I'm just going to keep going here, and eventually maybe you'll withdraw the bill because I'm going to wear you down. If I stand up here and talk for a week, or if me and a bunch of my whatever colleagues do that, then maybe you'll be like, okay, you know what, we give up. So that was the original idea of the filibuster. So it's not like that anymore. Now, just so everybody understands, what you have to do is you just have to declare we are filibustering. So you don't even have to do the talking. You don't even have to do the hard work. You don't even have to show the passion and commitment to a position. You just assert we're filibustering, and then automatically you need 60 votes or more to get it through. Again, I think if more people were educated on this, they would realize that this whole thing is a sham. That it is just a status quo protection racket. So they continue here. In 1917, the Senate passed a rule, Rule 22, I guess, or the cloture rule, which made it possible to break a filibuster with a 2/3 majority. In 1975, the Senate reduced the requirement to 60 votes. So it used to be 2/3, and then they changed it to 60 votes, which has effectively become the minimum needed to pass a law. There are, however, exceptions to the filibuster. So this is my favorite fact about the filibuster, because again, it shows you how massively arbitrary it is. Perhaps the most notable recent example pertains to presidential appointments. In 2013, Democrats changed the Senate rules to enable the confirmation of executive branch positions, including the cabinet, and of non-Supreme Court judicial nominees with a simple majority. 4 years later, Senate Republicans expanded the change to include Supreme Court appointments. Both changes invoked what is known as the nuclear option, or an override of a rule to overcome obstruction by the minority. So, in other words, what they're saying here is, with certain particular votes, you only need 51. So if you're picking somebody for an executive branch position, you only need 51 votes, and they get through. If you're picking somebody in your cabinet, same. If you're picking judicial nominees, so like judges that are not on the Supreme Court, you only need 51. If you're picking somebody on the Supreme Court now, you only need 51 because the Republicans changed it. They said we're never going to get 60 or more for the people we want, so we're just going to make it 51. So certain things, it's like, okay, yeah, let's just do a simple majority. Because that, like, literally makes the most sense. And also because if you had obstruction over, like, who's even going to be in the executive branch positions and in the cabinet, you'd never be able to get any, administration together because the opposition party, certainly this Republican Party, would just block anybody you pick. At times, the Senate has also exempted certain types of legislation from the cloture rule. For example, Congress's annual budget reconciliation process requires only a simple majority vote and cannot be filibustered. So this is the only thing that actually gets us any legislation through these days, is you have to come up with a big reconciliation package, which is about the annual budget, and then you have to put into the annual budget whatever policy priorities you really want to get through, and then you can get the 51 votes and get it through. And we saw this happen with a lot of Biden's legislation. So there's another exception to the filibuster. Likewise, trade agreements that are negotiated using fast-track rules cannot be filibustered. Other exemptions apply to measures that involve, for example, military-based closures or arms sales. In total, 161 exceptions to the filibuster supermajority requirement have been created between 1969 and 2014. 161. So, what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing? What a ridiculous system. And the problem is not that there are 161 loopholes to the filibuster. No, the problem is that there is any filibuster. Look, if you tell me, hey, as a compromise, can we just go back to the traditional filibuster where they have to get up and talk and not stop talking? I would shake on that right now. In fact, I think that system makes sense to some extent, because certainly if I'm in the minority party and, I want to try to block something, I'm committed enough where I will go up there and talk for as long as humanly possible and bring along 6 or 7 colleagues to do the same thing as me, and we can pass it off back and forth to each other. So it's nice when you're in the minority to have the ability to say, you know what, if we're dedicated and we fight hard enough and we're passionate, we might actually be able to block this from happening. So I'm open to the idea of the traditional filibuster. This new filibuster is a joke. And it is minoritarian rule. We are actively against democracy. We're actively against, like, the more popular position winning. We're actively against 51 votes winning in a 100-vote body. And that is what these absolute ghouls are high-fiving over. They're high-fiving over it. And understand something, guys. It is directly because of these two. They're the ones who gutted Build Back Better. They're the ones who even made the IRA weaker. So if it wasn't for these two sitting right here, if you just had two normie Democrats, just normie Democrats, you don't even have to go Bernie Sanders style. If you had two normie Democrats there, we would have had an extension of the child tax credit, which would have reduced poverty even more, relieve stress and anxiety because it gives money to people who need money with kids, right? You would have had lower prescription drug prices for all prescription drugs and not just for seniors, for the whole population. We would have had so many more positive pieces of legislation, potentially even Medicare expansion. Like, these were things that were on the table. And they're the reason why we didn't get it. And they're high-fiving about it in a room full of elites. So, by the way, just remember this the next time either one of these goofballs tries to pretend like virtue signal, like they're for the working class. There has never been a place that is less working class than Davos and the World Economic Forum. And you know what? These two fit right in there. Because what they know is, hey, we're swimming in corrupt campaign contributions, corporate money, billionaire money. So these guys are hanging out with their buddies here at the World Economic Forum. I'm sure they're fundraising too. And who are they going to represent? They're going to represent these ghouls. They are not going to represent working people. So a little bit more here from Davos that I wanted to share with you. It's from Ken Klippenstein. This is wild. Speaking at Davos, Senator Chris Coons and World Economic Forum President, I think that's Klaus Schwab, agree, or maybe it's not, is it? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Agree protectionism would strengthen supply chains and reduce political extremism by bringing jobs back, but, quote, it would shave off a lot of growth. So they're sticking with free trade. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. You can't parody this, right? This is beyond absurd.
Also, managing director of IMF is saying here that a bit of nearshoring to avoid this notion of just in time and a little bit more just in case, building a little bit resilience is fine. But if we go too much into this notion of friendshoring or more protectionist measures, we can shave off a lot of growth globally. We know that there is a new House. There is also partly a new Senate. How far will the U.S. go in friendshoring, making sure that things goes to Mexico and countries that you're allied with? Do you see the point of the IMF managing director, and how will the U.S. balance this to make sure that we also will have growth in the years to come, and this will be a very shallow recession, if a recession at all?
Look, thank you for your comments and the opportunity. I do think that American leaders and business leaders in particular recognize that the severe disruptions of the pandemic and some of the challenges of the reach and the scope of globalization that have caused a backlash in many of our countries, a populist backlash, certainly in the United States, need to be addressed. One of the ways to deal with some of our challenges in terms of the hemisphere and migration also is to do some nearshoring to improve the job opportunities in Central America, for example. But I don't think it will be as robust as potentially projected. I do think that we will continue to have an open economy, to be committed to free trade, and to see the robust value that globalization has brought to the world as well as to many of our people. This is a delicate point. It is unclear where a divided Congress might go in trade policy. But I do think there's been a lot of comment, a lot of concern about the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the largest pieces of legislation that a divided Senate just passed. A 50-50 Senate managed to do some robust things, invest in our own infrastructure, invest in our own science research, and invest in our own...
Okay, so let me decode all that for you. He's saying yeah, all right, maybe we'll change things a little bit and we'll do quote-unquote friendshoring, which is just another way of saying going back to like some protectionist policies. Yeah, maybe we'll do that a little bit, but really we're going to be committed to free trade and an open economy and globalization, which means, yeah, it's going to be business as usual. It's going to be the status quo. We're going to keep outsourcing jobs. We're going to keep doing a race to the bottom. We're going to keep trying to hire, Bangladeshi peasants to work for pennies on the dollar. We're going to keep destroying, the Rust Belt in the U.S. and shipping out their jobs. And so look at their frame of reference. Look at the concern of the guy who asked the question, right? The concern is like, oh man, like, we hope things don't change too much, you know what I'm saying? Like, we hope that we don't go back to this, like, crazy protectionism thing. And you should hope that we go back to that. Because one of the things we learned with the pandemic is how these global supply chains can lead to massive problems. I mean, you have the problem which I just described, which is, like, destroying your manufacturing base and destroying people's lives in your own country because you're outsourcing jobs that used to be decent paying jobs. But the other problem is, we saw with China, like, we were reliant on China for, like, masks. We're relying on other countries for, like, medical products and medicine and all sorts of stuff that we needed in the pandemic. But if these other countries are shut down because of the pandemic and they're, like, hoarding the stuff, well, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? How do you address that? Well, the answer is we need to start bringing jobs back here. We need to have more protectionism. We need to create more things here. And, like, that the pandemic really woke people up to this, right? There was a moment of, like, oh my God. And even people in the political establishment were like, you know what? This is kind of like a matter of national security. Like, if we don't have more robust supply chains and create them here and do as much as we can here, well, then the next time another pandemic or another crisis rolls around, who's to say we can't get goods that we absolutely need, the goods that are a necessity? And so, but again, their take is like, well, we're going to largely stick with how we're doing it. Now, why would they want to do that? You guys know the answer. Because they are the beneficiaries. They are the wealthy people. They are the elites. They are the ones who make massive amounts of profit and are billionaires as a result of this current system. The populist backlash was the people revolting against globalization and neoliberalism and so-called free trade, which is just outsourcing and destroying your manufacturing base. So, and you see, they're saying, oh, growth. Like, that's the main thing they come back to. As if growth is the only indicator that matters, right? Like, oh, corporate profits are up, bro. Corporate profits are up. Yeah, but as we've seen, they've been skyrocketing at a time when people are hurting more and more and more. 63% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, it's astonishing. This is what's going on at Davos. So again, to all the right-wingers who love all the conspiracies about Davos and the World Economic Forum, you don't need to make anything up. It's bad enough on its face. The conspiracy is out in the open. The conspiracy is the status quo. The conspiracy is capitalism. The conspiracy is neoliberalism and so-called free trade and globalization. That's the conspiracy. So again, how do you fix these problems? Yes, bring back more protectionist policies. You have to be intelligent with how you do it and how you implement it and where you start and things like that. But you bring back more protectionist policies. You tax the wealthy. You take that money and you put it into things like childcare and education and jobs programs and eliminating student debt and eliminating medical debt, etc. God, these people. One more for you. At Davos tomorrow, a panel about how great Saudi Arabia is. The chair, Fred Kempe, president of the Atlantic Council think tank. So that's awesome. Saudi Arabia's transformation in a changing global context. Their transformation. That's great. That's glorious. They're reformed, guys. They're enlightened now. Saudi Arabia is like super modernized now. They're basically Sweden. Saudi Arabia is. Look, money talks. And when you're in a room full of elites, It's all the billionaires, it's all the CEOs, it's all the heads of state. You're going to get stuff like this that emerges. You're going to get the disgusting rank hypocrisy. I'm sure they're lecturing on human rights, too, in some of these events. And then it's like, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, what say you? As if, I mean, Saudi Arabia's on the UN Human Rights Council, right? Like, it doesn't get more absurd than this. It doesn't get more absurd than this. These people are so disgusting, man. This group of the people currently destroying the world. That's what it is. So that's what's been going on at Davos.